This is a retrospective. It's the 10-year story of Rick, of me, of film, of podcasting, and how each of us has changed over the course of the decade, how each of us has seen film change, along with our memory of it, our relationship to it, and how the podcasting process itself has changed and evolved for each of us. We have an archive of 500 episodes from before I came on until now. It's a body of conversation. It's a body of work that we're both proud of, and we'd like to revisit. So this is a retrospective. It's dedicated to all of our listeners, but especially those of you who go all the way back to the beginning, or at least close to the beginning, which was April 2014. T.S. Eliot said, "April is the coolest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain." It's wasteland. So here we are in our podcasting wasteland, mixing memory and desire. Speaking of film, and for us, winter has kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, but tonight, on this podcast, with all of you, we don't forget.
There's something about looking back on 10 years and some 1,000 hours of talk. When I first started doing this was not my idea. I mean, I'm egotistical as all fuck, but the idea of recording something on a weekly basis and having somebody, and believing that somebody would be out there wanting to listen to it was really just a foreign concept to me. I just was like, wow, who the fuck is going to want to do that? Who's going to want to take their time and do that? And not in the matter of who's going to want to talk, but who's going to want to actually listen to that. And these are the early days of the podcast revolution, basically, and that's basically what it is. You're looking at the modernization of network conversation, basically, what do you call it? Opening up the arts to everybody. I used to say because I went to college, started my freshman year in 1992, and I graduated in 1996. At that point, and I went to film school at Northwestern University. At that point, we were still shooting on film, 16 millimeter film. We were cutting actual film on Steinbeck moviola decks, syncing sound. We would record on a Nagra. We would have a Bolex. We would, it was when a clapper actually meant something because you had to sync sound. At that point, in 1992, film was a little over 100 years old and hadn't changed much. Film began in like 1890, and it was basically shooting rapid images through a camera, and it was the dispersion of light and an image. And the point is that when you look back on it now, so much has changed from that time as a young film student to moving to LA, getting involved in both theater and a low-end aspect of the movie industry, but also this thing that we do. So this rambling has a point to it, and I have a destination. So what I'm saying is, the ability of the average person to record their voice, to record their ideas, to record their conversations, and put them out there onto the internet for people to find it. I don't think there's ever been a time in history where where regular people, regular civilians, have been able to connect with people in the way we have at this point. So it's remarkable to me that after 10 years, regardless of what our numbers are for each podcast, and I'm not going to lie to anybody, our numbers are not outstanding, but the fact that there are people listening to us in France, Ireland, Australia, the United Arab Emirates, Lithuania, it marvels. It really boggles the mind that my voice and your voice are given weight in somebody's day. Because there's also a part of me that's just that says it's just a couple of assholes talking on the mic about the shit that they care about. But that's an incredibly but like what else is art? Art is the creation of image or sound or just putting an opinion out there for other people to embrace. The last 10 years of my life have been buoyed by this podcast. This is the thing that I look forward to more than anything in my week. This is it. Because it gives an opportunity to, number one, talk to one of my best friends, one of the best friends I've ever had, about the shit that I care about, and hopefully force the hand to understand what it is this art, whether it be cinema or music or television or whatever the fuck it is that we're talking about in that particular week. It's an amazing opportunity to evaluate yourself and connect with other people. In this case, you, but also the listeners and people who have supported us over a decade. I think that's amazing. It's not lost on me how important that is. So I'm really interested in taking this journey back and reliving the past, because I do that a lot anyway, but it's really nice to have somebody who was there at the same time to comment on it. And we're about to have some Rashomon-like conversations, because I guarantee you we do not remember this shit the same way.
Yeah, no, we don't remember anything the same way.
No.
It's earlier I quoted T.S. Eliot, and now I'm gonna fucking quote Pink Floyd, because it's like that, and it's obvious. It's that song "Time" from Dark Side of the Moon, and it's like the person that I was when I joined you initially is no longer that. The same person. There are remnants,
Yeah.
There's the husk that's
Basically,
left,
yeah.
but the spirit is gone. No, I'm it speaks to so much of like this kind of retrospective type of episode speaks to the aesthetic and the themes that you continually go to, which is like the old man looking back with regret. And then so you get to Time with Pink Floyd, and I don't know how familiar you're with that album or any of that, but it's at one point it says, then one day you find 10 years have got behind you. No one told you when to run. You missed the starting gun. and you hear that, you hear that at a certain point and you go, oh, that's cool. Like that is how time seems to work. Then you hear it 10 years later and you go, fuck, that was how time worked, and it's still how it is, and it's not so cool anymore because it's true. Um, uh, every year is getting shorter, never seem to find the time. Plans that either came to naught or half a page of scribbled lines. Hanging on in quiet desperation is the English way. The time is gone. The song is over. Thought I'd something more to say. Fortunately for us, we do have something more to say. For now, because we still seem to have more of that time. Um, but to go back and to say, like, wow, like, there's also the element of, like, knowing that you had things to say, but you didn't know that you had so much to say about so many things, so many films, and that this has taken on the effect of a fireside chat or a water cooler chat, where if you're at work and you find that other person, that film person,
Yeah.
you're talking about fucking movies, and then it comes to the point where it's like, well, what do you think of this? Have you seen this? What do you think of that? And to be able to have access to an audience, and for the audience to have access to one's own, like, in the moment work, which is words, the spoken word, and for it to be able to, like, be disseminated that quickly and that far, is something that I came out of writing. And my whole thing is like, well, I'm not showing anything to anyone until I think it's ready.
Mm-hmm.
And then theater, same thing. And then these aspirations, these academic aspirations that I had, same thing, because it's kind of like, well, you're working it out not on stage, but your professor is working out in front of you, and then if you go on to do that, then you're going to be working that out in front of your students, and they're going to be working it out on paper to give back to you, so you can work it out together. But here, we're just working it out, going back and forth, remembering things differently, and sometimes the same. And then now, anyone can just stream this shit. Given that you have fucking Wi-Fi and whatever the fuck else, you can, like, take this and run with it. You can go and watch these fucking movies. A lot of things have been lost since the early days of the video store and all these things that we're nostalgic about. But other things have been gained. So let's go back to the beginning. Like, what remind us of how this happened?
Well, what happened was, your technology is a strange thing. It's always changing. It's always advancing. In some way, it's limiting the species, I believe, at least. But in a lot of ways, it's opening up opportunity. And I think it's a double-edged sword of being able to take advantage of something in a manner in which you help the species. That's a rather egotistical way of saying it, but I honestly believe that. I think part of me is like, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram are evil and designed to, maybe not designed, but at least have the effect of dumbing down the culture because of the vapid nature of what is being created for it. The selfie, the duck lips, the girl with big tits, as if that needed more of a showcase. All of that is, I believe, cancerous to society and a very dangerous aspect of who we are becoming and who we find ourselves becoming. But in the same respect, there are those out there that are liberated by the opportunity to create. When we started this episode today, I started describing my early days in film school, and the point of all that is that it was incredibly prohibitive at that point. Any time before the mid 2000s, I'm talking about 2010, probably 2007 and 2000 and later. Anything before that, it was incredibly cost prohibitive to create the visual image, the moving cinematic image. Film costs too much. Film processing costs too much. Sound costs too much. It was no longer. It was even something as cheap as a Robert Rodriguez film from 1991, whenever El Mariachi came out, that was still a $7,000 film. Who's got $7,000 to just piss around, to just piss off at that point? Do you? I don't.
No.
No, I mean, and granted, the man did miracles on screen with $7,000, if I remember correctly. But I mean, budget-wise, $7,000. But how many of those things can you do, and what is the luck of something like that being seen and catapulting somebody off into a career that they can look back on and say, "Wow, that was the beginning." So all of that was like I said, prohibitive. And when you have a cynical and limiting mind, it's very difficult to get past that. What podcasting allowed was the normal person to be heard. Now, if you have something that's worth being said, then it becomes another level of art. When I first started doing this, I was just a stand-up comic who was moonlighting as a substitute teacher, and I had already been kicked out of substitute teaching at that point. I was working numerous meaningless jobs: a tax preparer, a valet at a hipster hotel in downtown Los Angeles, a boys' home coordinator, life insurance. I mean, I did every shit job imaginable just to keep a roof over my head, lights on, and to some degree paying the Libsyn subscription to keep this thing floating. So at that beginning, we're all searching for the next big thing and the next thing to stay in the business and stay both creative and relevant. Now, my good friend at that time, Mr. Joe Diaz, he was struggling with his own difficulties at stand-up comedy, being a dirty comic that was at one point hilarious, but also very difficult to market. He started a podcast, as many of you know, The Church of What's Happening, and it was with him and a kid named Lee Syatt, the Flying Jew, that he met at a show. And this kid just came up to him and said, "Hey, I love what you do. I'd love to help you. Have you ever thought about podcasting?" And Joey was completely... I don't know if he didn't know what it was or if he just didn't give a fuck what it was. But with Lee doing the legwork to set it up and create something, and Joey backing it with whatever he, both financially and creatively, they created a pretty popular podcast. But also Joey was catapulted from his appearances on the Joe Rogan Experience. Now, Joe Rogan, he was not the beast that he is today. I mean, Joe Rogan, whether you want to embrace it or not, whether you like it or dislike it, Joe Rogan is an important voice in the world of news and cultural, the shifting cultural face. So Joe Rogan had the Joe Rogan Experience. Joey was a popular guest on that. Joey started his own podcast. And then Joey got the idea of creating a network of comics doing podcasts. My friend Steve Simone did a podcast called Good Times with Steve Simone, and he was just reminiscing about, childhood, much like his act. Childhood, wrestling, pizza parties, adolescent shit. It was him. Agostino Zoida, who was his podcast was focused on shit relevant to his life. Jerry Rocha, video games, I think it was. But Diaz came up to me and said, "You should be talking about movies." And I was ambivalent about it. I was a little bit. It just didn't seem like something that anybody would really be interested in. But I decided that maybe I could use his office space. We could record a few, see what happens. At that point, Lee Syatt was my co-host. Now, it was great to get started, and I think we did something like 30 episodes in the beginning, or maybe less. I'm not really sure how many we did. I've erased most of the earliest ones. I think we did about 16 episodes together. And it wasn't making the money that he had anticipated. It wasn't doing what he wanted, so it wasn't worth his time. He bailed. My first episode by myself was, I believe, episode 37, which was me talking about Bill Murray. And that's when, I guess the best way to describe it is the show started to find its legs, and I started to understand the potential of what this was and what we could do. Because this has never been a one-off kind of jokey podcast. Yeah, we have a good time. Yeah, we laugh, and this is fun. But this has always been a scholar, as egotistical as that sounds, as maybe as dismissive as some people want to be about the ego. What did somebody write about us? Frankly,
Pretentious.
Pretentious, yes.
Yeah, that was directed at me.
Was that? No, I think that might have been directed at me. I don't know.
No, it was about me.
Not everything is about you, motherfucker.
Yeah, let's not undervalue the ego. It was about me. I got insulted. I'm pretentious.
No.
I'm scholarly.
All of those things, right? But right. that's I don't shy away from that, and I don't shy away from the idea that you should embrace intelligence. I'm not trying to play an idiot. I'm not going to embrace that I'm a moron or I'm not that bright. In some respects, I think we're all ignorant of some subject. I'm not going to lie about
Obviously,
that. And and film is such an expansive study of the human experience. So much goes into that: art, music, social issues, cultural issues, historical retellings. All of that shit goes into it. I don't know everything about all of that, but I know when it's done well. And it really did become the railing against mediocrity. I wanted to do a show, and I still want to do a show now, that challenges the simplicity of people's entertainment options. Yeah, I like stupid shit as much as the next person. I love the Three Stooges, and I love Talladega Nights, the Ballad of Ricky Bobby. But where else are you going to hear two guys talk about? Where else are you going to hear two guys talk? Do a couple of weeks of shows that are dedicated to pedophilia in cinema, and to approach it.
Yeah, you're missing out.
Yeah, well, yeah.
If you don't
Those are good
embrace that,
episodes.
right?
Those are really good episodes because um, I had somebody tell me, how did this, when it came to Tim Roth's The War Room, not The War Room, whatever, the war, the
Warzone.
the War Zone. Thank you for letting me know that this film exists. And you had never seen it. You had never heard of it, I don't think.
No, I hadn't.
And it was something that had been sitting on my shelf for 10 or 12 years. And I finally had the excuse to sit down and watch it. And I think we were both really disturbed and well, obviously disturbed, but also overwhelmed by the artistry of it. Because it's a great film. It's a great film. It's really brave performances by the young lady who is in an incestuous, sexually abusive relationship with her father, played by Ray Winstone, and the oblivious mother Tilda Swinton. I mean, that's you don't get to see that often, and it would have been really easy for us to rail against it as some kind of exploitative, semi-pornographic trash, like Death Wish 2 or something that I've brought up numerous times on this podcast.
Plus, it's not like Screen Rant or Collider is gonna like be like, oh, check out the top 10 fucking pedophilia films. You know what I mean? Like, so you're never gonna hear about this fucking movie because like, it's not something that people want to really like discuss. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like this has been an opportunity to really dig into to go into these corners that maybe like, you know, we didn't even know. Sometimes you're in the corner and you're like, wait, where am I? And here we are, you know? It's, I mean, episode 38, you had a guest, you had Larry Wilson,
very nice
who
man.
did Beetlejuice. And it's like, now here we are, this year is going to be Beetlejuice.
Yeah.
It's very strange. There's no way that, like, you never know what's going to happen. You started bringing in friends. You started, you had an early episode with Steve Simone. You had episodes with Mike Black talking about Marvel films going way back and look at how that has changed or how it hasn't changed.
Yeah. I had, there was that. I had May Ali, daughter of Muhammad Ali. And she came on, and she, you know, and it was an opportunity for and let me say this, you know, I love that woman. She is a great person, and she does a lot in the community, working with underprivileged youth and kids that are left behind. And it was great for her to come. I don't know if she knew that she was coming to my shitty little apartment in Koreatown, but she never made any question about it. She just came in, she sat down, she talked about her work, her father. She didn't get upset when I challenged certain things about him. She, you know, and I think it was a conversation that you wouldn't hear on a lot of platforms. It was a little bit more personal, plus the fact that we were both comics at the Comedy Store. But all of that, the guest thing started to happen because I was really looking for somebody to do this with. Because as there's a part of me that feels that this entire process is a little bit self-centered and egotistical, which I don't run away from. That's kind of who I am. That's who you are to a degree. We go back and forth on who's worse on that, but it is kind of what it is. Looking for somebody to do this with me, Lee wasn't cutting it because Lee wasn't watching the movies.
Right. And as a, I'm jumping in right now.
Yeah.
It's around this time that because I'm your friend, I'm listening to some of these shows.
Yes, I remember.
And so I'm listening, and I'm criticizing this person because I'm like, how the fuck are you going to have someone on the show who isn't watching the movies? And I listened, and I, in my 20s, I was very, you go through these periods of where you're really interested in like certain subject matters. Ali was one of those ones that, like, I was reading everything about Muhammad Ali. I was, you know what I mean? It was like watching all these documentaries, really captivated by his story, by his biography, and just kind of like the breadth of his life's work, right? And the tragedy of it, the triumph, this rise and fall of this figure in American culture and in sports. And then so it was interesting that I was like, that's fucking cool that his daughter, and she's just a comic, but she's this person living her life, doing her thing, but she's happens to be the daughter of this of someone who's a legend, and now you're gonna you're talking to her. So I listened to that. I listened to these early episodes, and then to hear you do an episode or a few episodes with Mike Black, and I had met Mike Black. Like, I was like, oh, that's Rick's friend. And so it's like, I had the same experience that people have when they listen to us now, in that I was sitting at your table, listening to you guys talk about Marvel or Batman or whatever the fuck you're talking about. And to just take it in. And so I also, I go back as a listener, you know what I mean? Like, which is something that I think I don't really think about very much, because it's all, you just take it for granted. So this is that first year, the 2014, you're doing your thing.
Well, the thing is finding its legs. Yeah.
You're talking about Nolan, you're talking about other stuff that you would go on to talk about again, or we would talk about, or Walter Hill, Babadook, Inherent Vice, shit like that. And then it kind of, we get to 2015, you get to 2015. And then you start to, I think, really find that, this is my opinion, as a listener. I really was like, oh, he's got it. He's arrived at his own voice. Once I heard, like, you did an episode 48, all of this, and this is the purpose of this, is also for us to go back and relive all of that, but also for those of you who are primarily getting your material from Apple. As of right now, there's a cap on the amount of archived Apple episodes. But if you go to the Libsyn, go to watch this with RickRamos.libsyn.com, the whole archive is there.
Minus the early Lee.
Minus whatever you deleted, which is just a smattering of episodes. The save those. The archive is there. So episode 48, you did an episode on Podorowski, Gilliam, and Ricky J.
Yeah, one of my finer drinking moments. That was almost 3 hours by myself, and oh my god, you can hear me getting drunk in that episode.
And you can hear the ice cubes.
Yeah, I love that.
You can hear the ice cubes, and these were the days of it's in him and it's got to come out. John Lee Hooker. And yeah, hearing your friend get fucking drunk and crying on the mic.
Yeah.
And but at the same time, there was something that was cool about it because it was like it was just this voice. I always described it this way to you: it's this voice in the dark. It was like AM radio.
Yeah.
And because with a podcast you can listen to it any fucking time.
Well, that
For
was
me,
also part of the reason we didn't go with video.
right,
Because we liked the
right,
voice in the night. We liked
right,
the voice in the darkness. There was something powerful about that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and disembodied,
Yes.
which is adds an element of timelessness to it. Now we're going against that because we're underlying the time, right?
Yeah.
Time is waiting in the wings, as David Bowie said, or saying. And it was this really personal, and it was beyond me knowing you as a friend because it was like, I know you, but I have the benefit of, and I'm very lucky this way, I have friendships that go way the fuck back.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, I only knew you like 4 years.
Yeah.
So you were like, our friendship in terms of my tortoise level of friendships was like in its infancy.
Yeah.
So, and then you're learning about this person, what you think about this person is, but filtered through one's ideas about cinema and how that affects. And then, to me, it was interesting because it was like, all right, now you're doing your solo shit and you're taking us on this journey. You're going through these things. So episode 48 was interesting. The drunken years,
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you went into binge TV, talking about Deadwood, Breaking Bad, The Shield, Shameless, Rescue Me. You touched on elements of media, Assassins. Like there's a lot of stuff as I go through this, and I'm like, oh shit! Like there's so much stuff to revisit,
Oh, yeah.
to really dig into. Just the 87th Academy Awards, Spike Lee. You had a discussion with one of our listeners, Alan Lambert.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Corner Film Productions, episode 55.
Guy had the balls enough to make a film. Good for him. Yeah. I mean, that's who you want to talk to. These are the people the creatives. Yeah.
You did an Oliver Stone JFK episode,
Mm-hmm.
and then episode 57, you had Martin.
Yeah.
Martin Moreno talking about 50 Shades of Grey. That was another one that I listened to, and then this was when I knew I was engaged as a listener because I disagreed with this person.
Mm-hmm.
And you're engaged when you agree, but you also know you're engaged when you disagree.
Yeah.
And he at one point was talking about, I didn't disagree with him in terms of the BDSM, his take on that in terms of as it's presented in 50 Shades versus what people in that subculture or that lifestyle, just the way they describe it. But yeah. I disagreed with him in terms of certain elements of how his interpretation of a historical Jesus, or even if it wasn't a historical Jesus, but just the Jesus in general. And then I was just kind of like, yeah, I don't, this suits your worldview, but I don't think so.
Yeah. You're shaping something. You're molding truth into what you want it to be so that it serves your interests and your agenda. I get that a lot with them.
And I mean, and that's, we all do that, and we all look at things through our own lens.
Mm-hmm.
You did Tim Burton, you did some Tarantino,
mm-hmm.
you did Coen Brothers, and then you asked me. You were like, because I remember I was like, I would, we'll hang out, drink or whatever, and then you were like, you want to come in? Because I was saying like, yeah, Jesus, blah blah blah, and then you're like, do you want to come in and do an episode and we can talk about the Passion of the Christ. We can talk about the Last Temptation of the Christ. And I said, fuck it, let's do it. So that was episode 61, which I think we should revisit.
Well, I definitely think we should revisit those movies. I haven't listened to the
Yes.
conversation in a long time, but there's also episode 61. That's like 2015, maybe 2016.
April 2015.
I mean, our religious beliefs at this point are pretty set, but there's still a constant evolution of that, and I don't know if I'm stronger in my disbelief at this point or a little bit more understanding of why I believe the shit that I believe now. But those two films are important to understand our interpretation. I mean, The Passion of the Christ is what it is. I'll give it this much. It's well made, but it doesn't have what Scorsese's film has, which is a true, and that's not to say that Mel Gibson's dedication to Catholicism and the Christ is any less than what Scorsese's is, but you can tell by watching the film that there's a lot more emotion. There's a lot more artistically at stake with what Scorsese is attempting versus the torture porn that is on screen with Mel Gibson's film. But I'd like to go back to that.
Yeah, I would, and I would go back to it as to look at the way that courses look at the Bible as literature. Because this was the first and like at that point only podcast I'd ever. I'm just talking to my friend, and there's a mic there. So if I didn't listen to it. I'm just going off of memory because in part I wanted to do that. And let it be skewed. On the heading, you described me as religious scholar, which I would say that student, because scholar is giving me too much credit. I don't have those credentials.
I don't think I do. I think you do. I think anybody who studies something the way that you have studied, you're a little bit what's the word? Obsessive about the shit that you are interested in. I think
true.
When you dedicate that to it, you become a scholar. And it's not simple. And I'm defending you to you. It would be one thing if you just take the information and spit it back at somebody. But I can tell with you that you've processed the information and you've come to different conclusions than what might have originally been intended by what was read. That, in my opinion, makes you a scholar.
Well,
maybe that's semantics, though, but yeah, it's honest.
To quote Harvey Keitel in Pulp Fiction, let's not start sucking each other's dicks just yet. We have to clean a dead body right now. The interesting for me though, when I think about that episode, it kind of like in a way kind of set the template for what would be I think our approaches to the show. Obviously at this point I had no idea that I would be doing this with you 10 years later. I just came in to just talk to you and we were going to record it and whatever. So it was very casual. But we started talking about religion, and when I think back on it, it was kind of like we were having two different separate conversations, but at the same time.
Yeah.
Because I looking back on it, feel that like I think I was approaching, because I'm coming at the subject of religion in terms of someone who's studied it, and not studied in a way that is theological, and that, well, I'm studying this as a believer. It's approaching it in the way of like I studied this as a historical subject, Um, and so you were approaching it more from the position of a skeptic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think that when I say that it set the tone for, I think, our approaches to the podcast once we became this like team, I think if it were a journal or a newspaper or whatever, I think what I was attempting to do without even formulating this, because this was just a conversation. It didn't have the presentational, whatever creative, whatever qualities that we have come into the show since then, because it was still unconscious enough to just be a conversation in the raw, without having any preparation, without having any thought, without having anything, which has its own merit. But I think I quickly moved past that, because I knew that I would be kicking myself. In subsequent episodes, I would kick myself because I was like, I didn't say this. I should have said that.
Mm-hmm.
I should have. And so then I started writing ideas and making notes so that I could, or if you mentioned something, I could write it down. And if we went off on some tangent, we could always return because I had it here written in front of me. And so there would be a little bit more structure, but at the same time, kind of this freedom to go off. So having said all that, I think I was approaching it in terms of like a reporter. This is this, and then interpreting what I would report on. And then I feel like you were approaching it as an editor in terms of like writing an editorial or speaking an editorial, an opinion piece, judgment calls, which I think also speaks to our backgrounds. You know what I mean? Like, I have more of a writing background with some performance. You have and I'm not limiting us to this, but also like comic, working things out in the moment in front of people, coming out with strong statements. Little did we know that that would be, in some sense, a blueprint, a raw fucking blueprint for kind of like the characters that we would play on this fucking podcast. And so every subject matter that we talk about is kind of like laid out on some level in that format, because it suits our personalities and we've kind of fallen into those roles, without even like really, it was just something that I think was natural for us. So I didn't come on again. You did more Tarantino, you did more Aliens, you did a BB King episode, which was episode 65. You did Fury Road. We've just fucking almost 10 years later, he comes out with the prequel to that. So we just did that episode. You had Mike Black on again. You did a Melissa McCarthy. You answered some questions.
Yeah.
At this point, people are, some of them are still with us. I feel like this is the time when people are like really like connecting with the show. It developed already like a group of listeners. Stanford Prison Experiment.
Yeah.
You did They Live with Roddy Piper. Then I came back in August of 15 to do Straight Outta Compton, and talk about LA. So again, very conversational, a little bit more personal, I would say, describing LA in those terms. Our experience of it filtered through this kind of Straight Outta Compton kind of thing, a little bit of Menace to Society, Colors, you know.
Yeah.
And still no idea that this would be a a project that we would continue to be moving through together. But you kept pushing. August was Straight Outta Compton, Mean Streets. You did Black Mass and the Departed. Sicario, you did a Pryor episode. I don't know how many Richard Pryor episodes you've done.
I think I did 3, and one that was 2, and then one that was Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor. I started to do something on comedy teams, and I only really got through the Stooges and Carlin, Richard Pryor, Gene Wilder. That's something definitely I want to go back to. The Marx Brothers, Laurel and Hardy, and a couple other things. Yeah, there have been any number of ideas that have been started and either abandoned shortly thereafter or gone on considerably longer. And then sometimes it's hard to find an ending for some of this shit. It's difficult because what you do realize is that there's no finality to it. It's always changing. Our examination of the history of music and rock and roll. There's still a part of me that wants to go back to that. We had a hiccup there for a minute with our interpretations of it, and that's one of the good things about it is that we kind of find ourselves at loggerheads at certain points in our look at certain things with your interpretation of things being radically different from mine. I'm a little bit more dismissive of the experimental, but I like to talk about shit that I don't particularly care about, don't really like, and I'm not. You okay? What's that?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't necessarily like to argue about things. Sometimes that's interesting, but what we do, I think, is that we both have considerate views on subjects, and art is it's very interpretive. One of the biggest things that we've had a problem with was the Bellatar episode, where I was very dismissive. I admit that I was very dismissive, but the conversation, I think, was an interesting one. But it's interesting that you can have a film like, for me, you can have a film like that fails in the overall goal of what I believe cinema to be. And something like Tarkovsky's Stalker, which achieves it in a beautiful, more successful and human manner. I like the opportunity that this podcast has given both of us to expand our horizons on films that we might not have seen. I know you've been a little bit ambivalent about diving into Kenneth Anger because I know I'm not going to like that shit.
I mean, I don't think a lot of people are going to be like, oh, let me get a thing of popcorn and fucking like, yeah, let's go watch some Kenneth Anger. Like, I mean, I have friends who are like, yeah, let's go fucking watch some crazy Kenneth Anger and like, but most of my friends are not that. You know? Most of the people out there are not most people are gonna say, what the fuck is this?
Well, I mean, it always goes back to my standard of that's fucking white people shit. But in all fairness, David Lynch is white people shit too, and you know how much I love that asshole. There's a point in your life where either you double down on your problems with the thing, with your attitude, and in some cases hatred for a thing. But then there are also moments where life experience has provided an understanding that would have made it impossible to embrace the art earlier in life. When I saw Wild at Heart with You, that was the first David Lynch movie that I had watched of the Lynchian films. I'm not talking about the straight story, which is the one outlier in his filmography. But yeah, I had seen The Elephant Man, and that had a weird effect on me from childhood.
Mm-hmm.
But the first, because it's a frightening movie, and it's made in a frightening manner, as much humanity as he wants to instill in John Merrick, he goes about it in a very disturbing and prohibitive way. By the time I saw Wild at Heart, I was ready for some crazy shit, which made Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive, Lost Highway, and Inland Empire possible for me. I couldn't have watched any of those fucking movies in my 20s. I couldn't have. I wasn't prepared for it. And that's one of the great things about this show that we do is in a weird way like a journal. And when you go back and when you reread journals, you kind of hate yourself at certain moments. Oh, that's simplistic. Oh, that's childish. Oh, that's... Why are you trying to be fucking, why are you being pretentious on the page? But the difference in what we do here in front of the microphone is when you read something, you're instilling your attitude from now into the voice that's reading it. So it shapes it a little bit differently. When we listen to ourselves from 10 years ago, that voice is filled with the emotion of the time. And it lends it a greater sincerity. And so I understand a little bit more and am greatly less dismissive of who I was back then. I don't look back on those episodes from what I've listened to. I don't look back on them and say, Jesus Christ, what a pretentious cunt. Which maybe other people do. When I listened to the 44-inch chest episode, which I did 2 or 3 nights ago, the only thing I could think to myself was, Jesus Christ, I don't have any kind of a personal filter when it comes to showing all the ugliness. That was a little bit surprising to me. And that's the only thing that was surprising about that episode. Is that, wow, I hope she didn't listen to it. Maybe I do hope she listened to it. I don't know.
I mean, yeah.
You know what I mean? Where you don't want, because at a certain point you're going to be like, Jesus Christ, are you still holding on to that shit? But I think we all hold on to something because it's the thing that shapes us to the... What's great about... One of the great things about this is that it allows me to go back and see the things that have affected my life and still have a certain grip on me. The things that I've overcome, the things that I'm still holding on to, the things that will ultimately kill me. I don't know what all of that is, but this is a platform for exercising it. And it's very telling that the first couple of years, the opening song was Boogie Chillin'. It's in them, and It's got to come out. Let that boy boogie woogie. And that's what we do each and every week. We let it out and we boogie woogie. And it's cathartic. It really is. It's just, it's cliche to say this is my therapy, but in a weird way it is. Getting it out, letting people... regardless of who's hearing it, because I don't know these people. I've spoken to a few people, the heavyweight chumps. I've spoken to Cornelius a couple of times. I've spoken to Jeremy Sangiacomo and Alan Lamberg. I've spoken to them. But there are literally hundreds of people who listen to this thing and I've never met and never will meet. And I don't know what this podcast means to them. Maybe some of them are listening to that episode going, Jesus Christ, what a pitiful fuck. But maybe there are other people who are saying, God damn, I know what that feels like. And I've always felt that the movies and the scenes and the songs that have made me feel that way, that I know affect other people, make me feel like I'm not alone in this shit. Like there's somebody else who gets it. It's almost like, get over yourself, motherfucker. You ain't the only one that's had his heart broken.
Yeah, but yours is the only heart that you've ever had.
Exactly.
Um,
yeah.
It's crazy because the podcasting, in a sense, is an exercise in memory. And podcasting about film is like, okay, we're talking about movies that we saw, whether we saw them 5 minutes ago or we saw them 5 decades ago. It's memory, and we hold on to shit. Like I hold on to shit, but I think a lot of it is because the memory is so strong that it feels still like now.
Yeah.
And I've said this before, but it's kind of like when Lecter, and at this point, I don't know if it's, my memory fails me. I don't know if it's the book or the movie or both, but Hannibal Lecter he makes these drawings of the Duomo in Florence, and she at some point asks him, I think this is more part from the book, where like, did he draw them from memory? And he says, memory, Clarice, is what I have instead of a view. And that resonates with me, which is not to say that I don't have a view, but it resonates with me. And one of the things that like is so sad about death, if death is if that's just the end, the fact that with death memory ends. Because if I could have a disembodied consciousness, but I still got to in that consciousness, I could retain everything that I have now and just have memory, even at the expense of getting to acquire new memories. I would still consider that like a gift, because that's how much I live in my fucking head, and that's how much I love. That's how, and beyond just nostalgia, because also nostalgia is there's more to it. There are more connections to one's emotions, but just even without thinking of how amazing it was back then for blah blah, to just actually just go through the motions of like the picture book without attributing, and this is difficult to do, and I don't even know if how often I do it, but without attributing any kind of like, or tagging any kind of like amazing or any kind of like qualifiers onto to these images. If I do remember them as images, that's just worth it in and of itself. And of course, like, film is the moving image that you get to pin all of these emotions on. Even if it's nothing, it's just kind of like, or if whatever it is, those things change. At this point in the podcast, episode 82, it's called Reminiscing on 40 Years. This was almost 10 years ago, and you turned 40.
Mm-hmm.
And a few months later, you would do that episode that you just mentioned, the 44-inch chest episode. Like, what was that like to go back and listen to those, or to think of yourself and to think like, oh wow, this landmark 40, and now it's 10 years gone.
It's It's both uh it's difficult in some respects, but it's also very there's a certain level of joy in reminiscing about certain things. I've never had so many bad experiences in life that have made me feel like, God, I suffered through this, or I survived this, or what. It's never been that dramatic. But I am very reflective. I live in the past a lot. I think about the past, and I don't dismiss everything that has come before. It's not like I'm living for tomorrow. Maybe I should, but I had such a good time yesterday with so many people in my life that it's important to remember that. Um, when I listen to those episodes, I it's weird. A lot of people would hear a much younger version of themselves. I don't feel like I hear a much younger version of myself. I feel like I hear somebody reaching towards the old man that he wanted to be. It was there was something in that time that attracted me to being an old man, and having that sense of understanding of the world. Something that I've embraced. I don't know if it's good or if it's bad, but it's definitely who I am and who I've been. So when I listen to those episodes, it's it's a little bit disturbing to know that I haven't changed a whole lot. I think I'm not as anxious, and I'm not as hopeless, but I'm just as cynical and just as pessimistic or realist, as I've called it from time to time. It can be a little bit depressing in knowing that, or at least believing that I haven't changed. That the changes have been a lot more subtle, and they're a little bit more in 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 growing up and understanding that not everything is going to be what you want it to be. I was a lot angrier back then. See, this is really hard to comment on because I can't I could I can't look at it objectively. This is one that you have to, this is one that you have to tell me about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've changed a whole lot. I think I've mellowed and I've calmed down and I've accepted certain things, but all of that shit is still there. The anger, the cynicism, it's not, and it's not diluted. It's just better controlled. There is a little bit more of, there's a little bit more disgust with everything in those episodes, whereas now there's an acceptance. It doesn't bother me as much anymore. I don't know what today is compared to before. And as I listen to the episodes, I'm still not really sure of what the difference is. Now, when you listen to yourself in the episodes, what do you hear? I think you and
I hear the
yeah, go ahead.
I hear the gaps in between my words, and I hear um um
Mm-hmm.
um and and I hear, see, I'm doing it now.
Yeah.
And at the same time, this is the thing too, is that this speaks to we're talking about the emotion of it. We're also talking about, well, what is this technique? Have we developed?
Hmm.
What have we developed in the process of doing this?
Well, that's different. Yeah. I'm not as
But I think
concerned with that.
it all. Neither am I, because I we just did Jurassic Park,
Hmm.
and Jurassic Park is an old fucking film for us, right? Jurassic Park is like a 30-year-old fucking film,
It's hard to admit that, but yeah.
and I was saying, well, maybe, and I think I've said this also when I did when we did the episodes on describing ourselves, or what films create
Hmm.
defined us or whatever.
Yeah.
Which we'll get to in this masturbatory journey that we're on. But
Yeah.
I was thinking about Jeff. I was describing like, well, maybe Jeff Goldblum somehow spoke to me because of whatever, and then I mentioned that his cadence or whatever, and his pauses that he would take, and I guess I was like, well, I've always maybe done that, and I've always been like one who does that when I'm talking about something where I'm really trying to be measured in what I'm saying, rather than just kind of, okay, we need bread, we need water, we need coffee, we need wine, we need olive oil, we need whatever for dinner tonight. So that's obviously like the first thing that I hear. The
Hmm.
Other than that, I hear the moment. I hear kind of like, what are we talking about? Why are we talking about it? How did we get there? And I don't really, for the most part, I don't really think of myself as someone who's like nailed down emotionally or developmentally to one particular time. Um, and where I have the podcast as a kind of marker for that. Although, having said that, there are episode 83 and 84. It's a two-part thing that we did on masculinity in film.
Yeah.
So that something like that, I think I can't answer that. I'm gonna like defer, because if I were to go back and listen to that episode, and I haven't, because I would like to revisit those as well.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of part of that process, is thinking about these films and thinking like, this is something that not only can we revisit, but the listeners, especially the people, those of you out there who have been with this long on this ride, the listeners are changing too.
Hmm.
Everyone's changing, and everyone's staying the same in as much as they stay the same. So when I think of, if we're talking about American Pie, and we're talking about the Lester Burnham character, if I were to listen to that,
American Beauty.
I'm sorry, what did I say? American
Pie. Yeah.
Yeah, no, American Beauty. Sorry.
Yeah.
If we were to go back to, if we were to revisit that, and I were to, in preparation for that episode, go and listen to those things, and if we were talking about American Beauty, maybe I would hear, listening to that, I would hear someone describing the horrors as presented in that kind of story, that kind of like the horror of being a middle-aged man, the horror of domesticity, the horror of finding yourself as a middle-aged man attracted to younger women, and knowing that that's not, whether you're with someone or not, that for the most part that's not going to get fucking reciprocated. You know what I mean? Because it's like, your time's up as far as that's concerned, right? And no, and to be that middle-aged person, like having those thoughts, and you can say, and then you can see this with all this Kevin Spacey. Not even talking about Kevin Spacey, like what all that's transpired since we recorded that episode with Kevin Spacey, but to see in his performance, this, you can see that he's like, this is bullshit. Like, there's no fucking way that I'm just being a creep at this point. But I'm still drawn to this person just for the fact that, in the same way that when I was her age, I was drawn to her, I'm now twice her fucking age, and I'm still drawn to her.
Yeah, but she doesn't change on screen. That's the thing. I mean,
Well,
it's like,
no, because it goes back to Matthew McConaughey. I get older, they stay the same age, and you just keep on living, right?
Yeah.
But if I were to listen to that episode and then get on the mic and talk about it today, it's not, oh, how horrible it must be to be a middle-aged person dealing with this. It's, no, how horrible is it to be that middle-aged person, because you either graduate into that or you decline into it, however you want to take it, right? And then the flip side of that, though, is like, well, if we attach that even to like the 44-inch chest episode that you did, and you're talking about, you connected to that was a college reunion, and this idea of this element of this long time relationship that was but wasn't, and was, you described it as it was and I'm not going to do it justice, but you basically described it as kind of like a relationship of embers that never turned to actual fire. And we go back again, memory, you go back to that, and you think of those films, and you think of those songs, because obviously they're so connected to fucking songs and experiences and smells and whatever, and meals had, or meals that couldn't be eaten because your stomach was so fucking turned, because you were so emotional, drinks drunk, right? And it's always, the one who got away, the this, the that. And those things still stick out in my mind from my life before, but at the same time, I'm also embarking on these new journeys in my life that on paper I should have done before. But I'm glad that it got to this point now, because it's kind of like some episodes, some films, some discussions you're not prepared for, some books you're not ready to write until you get to a certain place. And so a lot of times we regret things that we didn't do. But sometimes it's kind of like we don't even know we're preparing to do them, because, we still have time. We still have time. We don't know how much time we have, but maybe we still do. Maybe the time is now. Masculinity in film, Fight Club. I still get angry, but now when I get angry, I sound like someone who's scolding someone, because I have like so-called like dad energy. You know what I mean? Like where it's kind of like, okay, mister, like versus some angry young asshole. Now it's just kind of like, well, okay, he's grumpy. And masculinity in film, you see yourself growing into these things where it's like, oh, I can see myself being taken seriously differently at work, no matter how great or how horrible the work may or may not be. And I can see also like how I can say, I can have a female coworker say the same thing that I'm saying, and for whatever reason, she's younger than me and she's female, and I'm older and I'm male, and what I say matters more somehow because I'm male and I'm older. And I could have my younger self standing next to me saying the same thing, and what I would say now matters more because I'm older. But in other contexts, it's kind of like, shut the fuck up, old man. You know what I mean? And it's like, well, and that middle age thing where it's kind of like, well, if I were to ask my mother about something, it's still like, well, you still don't know. Like,
yeah.
But, just the other day, I was talking to someone at work about like video stores and stuff like that, and about books and bookstores, and he says, well, if there's a book that I really want to read, like I'll read it on my phone.
Yeah.
And I was like, I just smiled and I was like, it's not the fucking same.
No.
And he laughed and he was like, it's not the same. And I said, it's not the same. It's not the same.
I think when you asked your question just now, I had a lot of difficulty with it, and I've been thinking a little bit about it.
The one about
listening to the old episode.
What do you hear?
Yeah. Here's the difference between you and I. When we started this, you came on. You were about 35, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was 40.
Yeah.
This show has been a part of my life for the entirety of my 40s. The 40s are a weird decade because that's when you look back on your life and you're slapped in the face by what you have achieved, what you have failed at, and the limited time that you have to make it all worthwhile, to do the things that you want. I don't have too many tomorrows. I have a lot of tomorrows, but when you take into account the job, the parental responsibilities, and I'm not talking about my responsibilities as a parent. I have parental responsibilities. You do too.
Yes.
All of that. The understanding that I'm going to be alone one day. That's the difference that's the difficulty in listening to those episodes, because when I listen to the episodes, I can hear myself already understanding that, which means that I've been hopeless for a decade. And I'm not talking hopeless in the sense of, that's a hopeless motherfucker. I'm talking about somebody who did not have hope.
Yeah, you're basically like Father Karras in The Exorcist. Yours is a crisis of faith.
Yeah. And I didn't realize how powerful that was until you just asked the question. I didn't realize the bleakness of it. So in a sense, the last decade of my life, although it has been productive artistically with this podcast, because let's be honest, we talked a little bit about it off mic. How many people have done what we've done for 10 years with the degree of dedication that we have had to it, with very little monetary success? We do this because we love it. We do this because it's something that's in us and it's got to come out. And I don't regret any of it. But there is a part of me that says, should there have been more to the rest of my life? I don't know what I can do about that except to try to make it work out from this point on. I don't know how much you want to talk about your life, but you're moving in a new direction. And I'm not exactly sure where the fuck it is that I'm going. I'm excited for you. For me, I don't know what tomorrow is.
Tomorrow. I think I'm flooding you with these rock and roll references. You say you want to do something like tomorrow never knows, man.
Well,
the
I
reels
wish I knew now what I knew. I wish I didn't know what I
yesterday.
didn't know then.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Because it was 20 years ago today. Sergeant Pepper taught the band to play.
Ah, shit.
I mean, it's fucking life, you know.
Yeah.
It's life,
Yeah, life doesn't
and
stop, doesn't wait, it doesn't make excuses, and it doesn't apologize. It just moves. It moves forward.
that's it.
Yeah.
And the listeners want an episode every goddamn week.
Yeah.
And we want our money. Buy me a coffee.
Yeah.
Tech.com/WatchRickRamos. God damn it.
Yeah.
We did that episode 85 on Spotlight and Lie, or LIE, pedophilia.
Yeah.
And still, I wasn't like on as a regular, but it was gaining that speed, and it kind of like, it was interesting to move in those directions of like, oh, now we're looking at different subject matter. We're looking at these different things that were going to basically propel us into kind of into like series.
Yeah.
And in 2016, you continued to do stuff. You did the current stuff that was currently in the theater. You did The Revenant. This is 2016. You did Anomalisa, about a film that we saw in Pasadena in a little theater, which was an interesting film. You did Kurosawa's Redbeard. You touched on The Thing and the Hateful Eight, featuring Kurt Russell. John Woo's Hard Target. You brought in Mike Black again. You did a Midnight Run revisited already at that point. Was 2016. You were revisiting Midnight Run. Prince died in 2016, and so you did an episode on featuring Purple Rain and other stuff.
Wow.
You did Aliens, which we just we did earlier in the year. You went to Taxi Driver, which is, always, the Taxi Driver is ever present in the cinema of the soul, right? And especially on this show. Then Muhammad Ali died, so then you brought me back and we did that. So we discussed Facing Ali, which is a great kind of look back with all of his opponents when we were kings. And his is kind of like that example of it's that life cycle.
Yeah.
Where we all hope to, this the angry young man, cocky, but hopefully we can back it up. We achieve these great things. Sometimes because you achieve great things, you suffer for it, and your culture or your society punishes you. And then unfortunately, the price you pay for living long is getting old. And the price you pay for getting old is getting sick. And this happened to Muhammad Ali, and then ultimately the price for living is dying. He died. So we came back, or I came back to do that. You did some heavy hitters. You did Brian De Palma, Scarface, and Carlito's Way, which is one that I would like to do with you, or two episodes that I would like to do with you.
Yeah.
You did a Bukowski. You did Once Upon a Time in the West. You did a Remembering Gene Wilder.
Yeah, that was an emotional one.
Yeah.
I really loved Gene Wilder, and that was, I think a little bit of that came out when we did Young Frankenstein a couple of years ago, or last year, I can't remember, my appreciation. And because also, it's like you start to think about your artistic heroes. I'm not even just going to say comic heroes, although comic, that's a whole other level of artistic hero to me. Because of the importance of comedy and making people laugh and hearing laughter, and it's kind of weird for somebody who hates people as much as I do, that comedy would be the thing that I love, and I really don't like people, but when and I think when you dive into the world of these artists, I just finished two books on Richard Pryor. One was called Becoming Richard Pryor, and the other was called Medium Cool: The World That Created Richard Pryor. And you find out how ugly the world can be and how it shapes people. And it really is. It's the old argument of nature versus nurture, and would a Richard Pryor have been possible without the abuse?
Right.
Because you know what I mean. So do you sacrifice a person, a Richard Pryor, on the altar of the comedy, to the comedy gods, because there has never been anything like it. You and I did live on Sunset Strip and live in concert. And I know that I don't want to give myself too much credit, but I know you would have watched those films in your life and you would have loved them and appreciated them. But I think, knowing me and knowing that we're going to talk about it in an episode like that, number one, watching a movie to talk about it in an episode changes the viewing.
Absolutely.
But also, knowing people that live in that world, I think, changes that viewing.
Yeah. I mean, when I first rented those films, when I first saw them, I wasn't even like heavily into theater. I still was like taking classes and stuff. You know what I mean? I wasn't like, I was just kind of like getting into it. And then so to have now, years and years later, to watch these things after having known you, and even looking at it from a performance perspective. And I remember you said, like, even then we saw it differently, because you were like, well, you saw him nervous and I saw him as like so relaxed. And and so it's one of those things. I mean, and every episode it's frozen in time in the way that every film is that we discuss. And then to be able to go back and revisit, I mean, right, we're talking about 2016. We did, episode 94 was about the 88th Academy Awards. And that was the Oscar So White Academy Awards. And Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith were very prominent in that.
The setup that would eventually culminate with the slap
around
the world. Yeah.
Little did we know that in 2022, which is now 2 years away, ago, I mean, 6 years from that, that at the 94th Academy Awards, Will Smith, he would act out and assault Chris Rock on fucking stage. And we did episode 108 and 109. And I think it's interesting that you had to, this is 2016 in September and October, and you had the sense to put a serious discussion about pornography, and it was part 1 and part 2, episodes 108 and 109.
Well, I didn't want it there. There are certain things that people are going to, it's salacious. People are going to be, these guys are going to be talking about Debbie Does Dallas and Schindler's Fist, and they're just going to be joking about, but no, we were, and we did, I think we did laugh a couple of times at certain things, but yeah.
But it's also like the sense that I think maybe even back then it was kind of like, I think the idea of still at that point, podcasting in general, was, with the exception of certain topics, unless it's for the most part, podcasting is friends hanging out in someone's garage, talking shit about whatever and just laughing, and then people can just kind of like plug into that and laugh too. And in the same way that I think, and I mean, I could be wrong because I'm not connected to that aspect, but kind of the way maybe there's a stigma around like online gaming or some shit like that, where like streamers, you just think of it as like very casual and very like, it's either going to be these dudes that are like in their pajamas kind of shit, or else some chick in her pajamas showing her fucking cleavage,
Yeah.
and that's that. You know what I mean? It's kind of like it's easy to just kind of throw it into that corner and just be like, yeah, okay, like that's that. So the idea of like, okay, we're going to discuss pornography in film. We're going to talk about Boogie Nights. We're going to talk about Wonderland, The Legend of Ron Jeremy, After Porn Ends. You know, and then and since then, like porn stars have been, and porn stars have always been. It's always been a tragedy.
Yeah.
But porn stars they've gone the way of regular celebrities where they seem to die in threes. August Ames died, I think it was in 2018. And I think John Ronson, I think is his name, he did like an expose or a look at that, and that was a result of online bullying. She killed herself. Ron Jeremy has been accused of rape. You know, this is after the Me Too movement, which would come between the time of our recording of this episode and now, and has dementia. And you know, the same month that we recorded that episode, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that it's the same month that we recorded that episode on pornography. That or either the first one, which was September, or the second one in October. It was at that time, and this is going to speak to another shadow that's been cast over the amount of time that we've been doing the show. It was in that time that Donald Trump had his lawyer, Michael Cohen, pay $130,000 to a porn star, Stormy Daniels, before the election of 2016, so it wouldn't affect him, because that Access Hollywood tape had come out, the Grab 'Em by the Pussy tape, and the story broke 2 years later. But now it's only, you know, like, we're still dealing with some of these issues that are now these current events still. So when you think of pornography and you think of popular culture and you think of current events, Stormy Daniels, to leave her out is impossible. And in 2016, did we think like, how would we have known that? Oh well, we're going to talk about whatever she was, whether she was like one of those vivid girls or whatever it was, whatever was her niche or the company that she worked or her area of interest, whatever, in pornography, that it would be like, oh, side note, this is happening. No one knew. But it's crazy to look back on some of these things in hindsight and to see like shit, like how much of Donald Trump's shadow has fucking like been cast over just because of where this podcast fell in terms of the timeline of history. There's no way to get around that, and he's come up so much, and he will come up. And as I rattle off and through some of these episode titles and subjects, and the films, we're going to continually like kind of go to Trump because he is so relevant still. And now we're in another election year.
Well, think about it. It's like we've been doing the show, what, 10 years? Trump has been a factor in that for 8. I hadn't really thought about it.
Yeah.
4 years.
Yeah.
The campaigning, 4 years of his presidency, the year before that, and then 3.5 years of Joe Biden's. Wow, that's a big chunk of time, and it's a handprint that's going to be felt for years to come.
Yeah, and so we arrive at your 44-inch chest episode, which I listened to, and it was again going to that radio voice in the night, and very personal and very just interesting to listen to, also in terms of the subject matter of it, of like the reunion, going back, and having watched that film because you showed it to me,
Yeah.
And thinking of myself in that situation, like being this, like having this kind of bachelor mentality for so long, even to the point of, I mean, the film is about the trials of this character whose wife cheats on him, and then he and his friends abduct the person the wife has cheated with. Well, in my former, according to my former escapades,
Yeah.
I would have been abducted, you know?
You would have been Loverboy, yeah.
And John Hurt would be arguing for my murder. And then now, again, almost 10 years later, and I go from that to having dreams of settling down and having a little cottage where Leslie and I can keep bees so I can make candles and mead from their honey, and I can be her ornamental hermit in the garden. And learn to play the hurdy-gurdy or something like that. And that's my fucking, like, that's that. You know what I mean? And I'm just happy to be able to look at the wall and look around the room and say everything in here has a story. Versus every one of those women is a story. Or every one of these bars is a story. But here it's like every one of those movie theaters is a story. And every one of those movies is a story. And every one of these episodes is a story. And so it's kind of like, it gets to the point of where it's like, well, what was happening in our lives when we recorded this episode? What was happening in our lives when we saw this movie, when we rewatched this movie? And then what's happening to the listener? Like, what was happening in your lives when you were listening to this episode? If you remember, if it matters that much, you know what I mean? If you connect with it that much. And from there you went into, well, I started coming back in. So you did your 44-inch chest, and then we started doing 90s episodes. And even back then, it's like, of course, obviously we're looking back. So we did Natural Born Killers, Strange Days, Naked, Dark City. You did a Scorsese. And then we started talking about vampires. We did a series about the vampire, obviously the creature that's afflicted with time, for better or for worse. Most of the time it's considered a good thing unless you go to Only Lovers Left Alive, the Jim Jarmusch film, in which the central character, well, one of the two of the couple, he's bored as fuck because he's like, well, I'm over it, you know. I'm done. I'm tired of this. And we talked about Dracula, Nosferatu, Bram Stoker's Dracula, the addiction, the hunger,
Fright Night,
yeah, Near Dark, John Carpenter's Vampires, Let the Right One In. So from 2016 into 17, we got into this mode of like, we were starting to do series, where we really go through these films. And if you're interested in, I mean, this would be interesting to go back to also. Like, I don't particularly, there are some episodes that I can say, like masculinity in film, how is it that changes that? How do you feel about, you know, do I still feel the way the narrator says I should feel in the time of watching that film where it's like we are the middle children of history, um, or or at this point am I just fucking history's weird uncle? You know what I mean? Like, for the vampires, if we go back to it, is it like is how is it now where it's like, do I want to be more of a vampire if I ever did? Would you want to be more one as a teenager, or would you want to be more one as a middle-aged motherfucker where it's like, well, if I'm going to be a vampire, I mean, the time is now. Let me turn now, because I still have enough of whatever I have to, like, I can maintain this undead, like, vibe, um, versus, like, in a few years, I might as well just be fucking dead. Like, no. Um, so these are questions worth pondering, people. We did Dirty Harry,
Mm-hmm.
which was interesting. You did David Lynch and Todd Browning, so Freaks and The Elephant Man.
No,
We
was
got
it?
it.
No, it wasn't. It was Freaks. Yes, it was Freaks and the Elephant Man. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, it was. Yeah, because there was a double feature. Because somewhere in there I saw Eraserhead, and I think there was a part of me that I've never hated and was intrigued by a movie so much as that film.
That one would be interesting to go to, because
Yeah.
it's kind of like as men with no children.
Yeah.
And what is that? And like, because Eraserhead speaks to the fears of fathers, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does.
Um,
Very much.
and so that would be an interesting one to go into. We did Man versus Nature, and I know, like, The Gray for you
Mm-hmm.
was a film that really, like, you connected to.
Yeah. Immediately.
We did so in the Man versus Nature episodes, which were 122, 120, and 124. We did The Revenant.
Mm-hmm.
We did The Edge, which is an old Anthony Hopkins, Alec Baldwin film from the mid to late 90s. We did The Gray. We did Grizzly Man.
Yeah.
And we did Into the Wild. So that's interesting. Logan was another one. Redemption and Regret. I know that one really connected.
Yeah, that was a meaning. I think I watched that movie. I don't know if I watched it a couple of times and then recorded it, but I know that I came home right after watching it set up and started recording. And that might have been a drunken one as well. I can't remember. But it was I mean, shit, it was regret. It was sadness. It was looking back on the mistakes of life and trying to understand, where you should have taken the right turn instead of the left. And I think everybody has that in regards to to certain aspects of their life. The person who got married and has kids wonders what it would have been like to not do so. The person who didn't have kids, I wonder what it would have been like to get married and have kids, or to even fall in love on the level that your average person does. I don't know. Life is one thing that the podcast has taught me, though, is that life is not really about. Life, for me at least, is not really about regret. It's about understanding that sometimes you have nothing but bad choices in front of you, so you have to make the best bad choice that's available to you. That's watching movies. That's when you see a good movie shows you the difficulties that you face. I don't know. We were doing a my defining episode, defining RickRamos, and you and I were talking about Blue Collar. And I was kind of surprised at how in sync we were on a lot of the film, but also the understanding of the hopelessness of that film. And this is kind of what I loved about doing that, is that you were pointing out things in the movie that I didn't necessarily see, but you were also pointing out things about my viewing that I didn't realize. Because I was like, yeah, I did think about that, but it wasn't as pronounced as when you said it. The role of the Yaphet Kotto role in that film, the difficulty. You and I are both now working jobs that we don't. You would never
Careful.
be you would never be mistaken as to say that they are artistically fulfilling. Is that the best way I could say it? Is that a good?
Yes, that is evasive
Yeah.
and diplomatic enough. Yes.
Yeah. But we also, at 49 and 44 respectively, understand the importance of doing these jobs. It's not even importance. It's the absolute, there is no choice but to do these jobs. Maybe we could do other jobs, but we'd still be doing a job. These are the best. Sometimes I feel like I'm living my best bad choice. But it didn't stop me and it didn't stop you from chasing a bigger dream. There's not going to be a time in this life where I'm going to reach the end and go, well, I should have tried that. That will not be uttered by me. Whether it's the career, the art, or the podcast. I did what I wanted to do. And I think you and I can come to this episode every week knowing that we did the things that we wanted to do, and we're still fighting to squeeze them in when we can. I don't live with regrets in that respect. Listening to that on the podcast really helped me remember that. That shit meant a lot. That meant a lot.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
So for now,
Yeah.
all of you listening out there, please be kind and rewind. Go back. Visit the Libsyn Watch This with RickRamos.libsyn.com archive. We just kind of got up, just tipped just to the ankle in what we've done. We got up to episode 123 was the Logan episode.
Yeah.
Visit buymeacoffee.com/watchRickRamos. This episode is dedicated to all of our listeners, all of you. If you've been able to give, we appreciate that shit. If you can give more, cool. This is primarily to keep the lights on so that we can continue to do this and we can keep this archive going so that we can go back to it, you can go back to it, and we can continue in this cinematic journey of ours. We're going to continue with this risk perspective for next week and however long it takes, and stay with us and keep watching, keep remembering.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.